Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Just before we get things kicked off, just a little bit of housekeeping. We do have the lines muted, but feel free to utilize the chat for any questions, and we will make sure to get to those questions at the end of the webinar. Also, we are recording this webinar, and we will send a recording to everybody after the fact, so you can view the webinar on demand at your leisure, as well as a special offer that we'll be speaking about at the end of the webinar. So my name is Matt Starnes, and I'm proud to welcome Kerry Mann. He's the founder of Mantralogix, and today we're going to be speaking about traceability, compliance, and quality control, or as we call it, the Trinity of Success for Food Manufacturing. Basically, you need each of these elements. They're all required to add value, safety, and quality of food companies' products. I would like to now kick it over to Kerry Mann. Kerry, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day to join us to talk about this important issue for food and beverage and pharmaceutical and nutraceutical manufacturers. The environment we live in today, most of our food comes from processed environments, pre-processed, and it has become vitally important, not just ethically, but legally, to be on top of issues related to traceability, which is inextricably linked into compliance, which in turn is inextricably linked to quality control, and hence our term of Trinity of three concepts within the environment of human consumption related manufacturing. So to talk about these topics, we'll go through and discuss how Sage X3 as a software tool helps manage these concepts and de-risks or mitigates the environment, business environment, and overall protection of shareholder value. So with that, we will talk about the traceability component first. Modern manufacturing environments are getting more and more complex and more automated. It is no longer a nice to have to be able to provide complete end-to-end traceability as it relates to raw materials, ingredients, and subcomponents that go into a product for human consumption. It is a legal requirement. So from that standpoint, it creates a tremendous overhead in the operations of a food manufacturing company, whereby it is required to be able to identify a discrete lot of every raw material that goes into an intermediate product, which may in turn go into a finished product in the event of a recall. So how does that affect, for example, let's take a company manufacturing shortbread cookies, as we see in this graphic, with certain jelly added to it. So in this process, flour, sugar, butter, shortening, other products are coming together at initial stages, which perhaps are rested before they're baked, and at baking, certain toppings, powdered sugar, and other things might be added, and last filling, as we can see the strawberry filling being added to the top, which in itself perhaps was produced as a combination of many ingredients. Now, if a package of this cookies goes to a grocery store, Mrs. Smith goes out and buys them, and out of 3 packages, her child or somebody consumes one, gets sick. She picks up the phone, calls the grocery store with her concern, and immediately she's asked to bring those packages back or identify the lot numbers on the packages. And this starts a chain where now a stopwatch is ticking and the manufacturer is liable for responding within the limits of that. That's defined within various legislations. It's slightly different between Canada and the US, but suffice to say, it's a very short period of time, 24 hours or 48 hours, whereby the grocer calls the manufacturer with that lot number. Manufacturer has to start a chain to say what were all the ingredients that went into manufacturing of that specific lot number of cookies, not just the cookie part, but the filling part. What work order was it made on? And at that point in time, identify what the implicated ingredient was that may have caused this issue, and then immediately do a top-down with that ingredient to say, where else did that get used? Did that get used in peanut butter chocolate chip cookies or wherever else? And then be out with a proactive recall to all channels where those materials went. Now, most environments have these records in a paper basis, and by the time, if this work order product batch was manufactured 6 months ago, that paper is buried deep with other things. To go back, start unraveling that within 24 hours becomes a major issue for the organization. And at that same time, the appropriate authority, FDA in the US or HPB in Canada, intervenes, and they oversee the process of that information being documented. And if they are not convinced that that information is sufficiently recorded in a manner whereby it can be isolated specifically to that batch, and there was commingling of materials with other batches and so on and so forth, they can keep expanding the scope of that recall until they are satisfied that they've completely isolated. Now, that could be a week's production, a month's production, 6 months production, or years production. And you can only imagine if a company is forced to recall years worth of production, that can be a terminal event in the life of the company. Some of the leading companies in the last few years, we've seen some major companies having to shut down because they were not able to produce the traceability information, or the information wasn't tight enough whereby they could isolate it to a certain batch, and was hence required to recall a very large amount of product, which is burdensome, and the cost can mount very, very quickly. So that, in essence, is a notion of traceability. There are many organizations, starting with the all-embracing global body, GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative, which is a consortia of many organizations that, in their various respective scopes, look after or provide standardization for measuring how an organization can be deemed to be compliant. From a compliance standpoint, this is considered to be based on their ability to make their materials traceable from finished goods right back to raw materials, as we discussed, and vice versa. And it also involves their ability to monitor and measure the quality of their products from end to end, which is what we're going to talk about in just a minute. Now, having a world-class system to manage this type of requirement requires underlying systems, and we find many organizations still have paper-based systems or inadequate traceability, and many a time not knowing the risk is not a protection. So it's very important first to be educated about what the requirement is, what risk does that pose for the organization, and then how to go about mitigating that. And again, we're going to talk about in a minute of how the tools that Sage X3 has to offer help with that ability. Many leading edge organizations now have a routine, as a routine part of their standard operating procedures, SOPs, issue mock recalls. And these are done randomly, and their operations are then challenged to produce information related to that recall as if it was a real recall to stress test their underlying systems. So we highly recommend all organizations that are dealing with human consumption products to participate and create an environment within the organizations where they're proactively doing mock recalls, and make it very participative throughout all departments within the organization to know that all aspects of the organization can stand up and rise to the occasion if such an event is triggered in real life. Moving on to the next concept of compliance. Now, compliance, again, is defined by various legislative environments. However, the overarching body, the Global Food Safety Initiative, has many schools of thought or concepts in and around compliance. And the whole idea, the notion is to guarantee food safety and for all human consumable food. As we know, we have become a global village, and food products are moving from jurisdiction to jurisdiction all over the world. And some jurisdictions have tighter standards and others don't. With a global organization, there are no barriers to trade across nations, and people can still hold accountable everybody can be held to the same standard in terms of accountability for food safety. So compliance becomes a very important piece. In North America, we're very familiar with a term HACCP, which stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point, which was precursor to initiatives like the FSI and ISO 22001, which are more international in nature, where its focus is examining the end-to-end process and looking where the critical control points are in that process and what type of hazards can occur, and then what would be the protocol to mitigate the risk. For example, if you are manufacturing a chicken soup and poultry is known to be a higher risk from salmonella or other types of microbes, in the process, one of the critical control points might be to monitor temperature to make sure that chicken temperature right to the inside is at a certain level, and it's measured at regular intervals throughout the process to make sure that it is properly sanitized as part of that recipe. And its HACCP process would be take temperature readings at regular intervals, record them, and if they're below a certain point, stop that process, because we know its outcome is going to be a QC problem. So from a compliance standpoint, having that type of a process in the first place, and then having a way to record it in a manner that it is seamlessly intertwined with the regular production data, which is normally captured by an ERP system and then reported to higher functions like finance and inventory. Having everything seamlessly tied into one place becomes very, very important. The compliance piece can also look at other risks like allergen-borne risks. In today's environment, certain allergens have to be very clearly declared, like nuts, and increasingly things like gluten and dairy, egg products have to be declared very, very clearly. Not just if they're contained in a recipe, either in a substantive quantity or as trace elements, but also if there is an opportunity of cross-contamination whereby product A that was run on a line and production was finished, now product B is being run, but product A had the allergen and B doesn't. There is a compliance, from a compliance standpoint, process to sanitize that line and record certain data. In many environments, they're required to do microbiology, and the results of that micro is recorded as a mitigation point to make sure that the product B did not get cross-contaminated with product A. And the underlying systems of the company should be capable of event action notification. First of all, if that type of environment exists, the system should be able to inform that after product A, these are the compliance requirements whereby complete line sanitation needs to be done. These are the tests that need to be performed, and the outcome of those tests need to be recorded before product B can be run. And the lot numbers and batch numbers of product A and product B are recorded, and the intervening steps taken are also recorded. So down the road, if there's an issue, that company is protected properly as it followed the protocol. So that's another very compelling example of compliance. Sage X3 provides very efficient solutions to manage the impact of allergens, not only for the value addition that a manufacturer does in their plant, but also that are born out of upstream process done by their suppliers from incoming raw materials, as it provides the ability to track the incoming CFAs or CFCs on those materials, whereby an allergen might be an element tracked on the said document, which provides us a nice dovetail to our next concept of QC. Now, quality control is the third part of the Trinity, and it's tightly, again, as I said, inextricably linked to compliance and traceability. QC or QA, quality control, quality assurance, really needs to be part of the culture of the organization, where today's food or human consumption organizations really live and breathe that culture. And the underlying systems tactically have to support that culture. So Sage X3 provides a very powerful platform whereby an organization can go in and define what quality control steps vis-a-vis tests that need to be performed at various points in the process. For example, there might be certain set of tests that are performed for purchased materials as a particular batch of those materials is received into inventory, or provide an ability to take a certificate of authenticity or certificate of compliance that comes with the product to be entered into the software as incoming QC tests, thereby making that record electronic and available to be interrogated at any time should a recall happen down the line. And not just the purchased materials, same is true for the items that an organization is manufacturing themselves, whether they're an intermediate. In the example of our shortbread cookie, the strawberry topping or the filling that's placed would be an intermediate that might be manufactured ahead of time in a cooked kettle environment. There might be a lot of tests that need to be performed with that, and then that is incorporated into the final product, which is the shortbread cookie, which may have its own tests, and then the final product before being packed may have its own tests, thereby giving it complete visibility from raw material to finished product of all of the steps taken to ensure a top quality product fit for human consumption. So the quality control plays a very, very important role to capture and then track this type of information electronically. Tools like Sage X3 provide a very elegant environment whereby users can record this information and then interrogate this information, not just in the event of a recall or an event whereby risk is created, but also interrogate this information for continuous improvement, whereby statistical calculations similar to SPC can be run on data coming from various production batches to see trend lines as it relates to various quality parameters. So there is a continuous effort to improve, which very much dovetails back into lowering the cost of quality or cost of production. So it provides a very, very powerful platform in that environment. Organizations have many different ways how they enter that data, how they consume that data. Sage X3 provides a very open platform whereby the data can be entered through scanning of barcodes or interfacing directly with the PLCs on the plant floor, or interrogate an intermediate system like a SCADA system to gather and consolidate that information. And that expertise Mantralogix brings to bear of integrating various systems into a turnkey solution for a food manufacturing company. As I'm speaking, I'd encourage, if there's any questions, to please enter that into the chat session. We're monitoring the chat session and address as many of the questions as the time allows. So moderators, do we have any questions so far up to this point in time?
Hi, Kerry, this is Matt. We do have a question. Is X3 the most common thing that best to implement?
Best to implement just in general or for a specific environment?
That's all the question said. So
yeah, you know what? I think even in our business, to prescribe without diagnosis is malpractice. So we're a little more humbler than saying that X3 is a good fit for every environment, but certainly for food and beverage companies, in 90%, 95% of the cases, it is a very compelling fit in the mid-market space. So that's a qualified answer to that question, and we would love to look at your specific requirement. If in the chat you can add some additional information, we will gladly cooperate and work with you in assessing its fit functionally and from a technology standpoint with other technologies that might be in place. Any other questions?
Okay, I'm just looking in the chat here. I don't see another question at the moment.
Okay. No worries. So we'll jump to the next topic, which is basically a lot of this is about the human capital and empowering the human capital. You know, most often we get asked, you know, whether this is about technology and having the right technology. I think that's quite important, but it's even more important to make that technology available to the human capital that the organization, their team members, find it easy to use and configure it in a manner that they find easy to use. Most manufacturers don't have computer scientists on the plant floor. They have people who know their processing environments really well. So it's incumbent upon us to train them properly and make them very comfortable with using the system. So adequate training is very, very important. If there's a downside to an ERP system, sometimes it's your lowest paid people enter the data that your highest paid people make decisions on. So it's vitally important to bring everybody along for the journey and empower them to use the system as we intend for it to be used, so it produces meaningful, interrogatable, and intelligible business intelligence end of the day, which allows the company to grow very rapidly. And maintaining the databases, doing periodic maintenance on the underlying data and making sure the hygiene of the data is perfect. I'm sometimes scared using the term perfect, but perfection is our goal, and a world-class application provides ability to make sure that the perfection can be achieved in the underlying data. And we have steps to make sure that garbage in, garbage out does not come into play. Last but not least, I think leadership has a vital role to play in the implementation of such an environment whereby the culture flows from top down. And if the leadership of the organization is committed to excellence in their product quality, product offering, then we are in a position to align the rest of the organization tactically from software and a process standpoint to also be aligned to the same thinking of excellence in product quality and product profitability, which is vitally important to shareholder value, enhancing the shareholder value of a company. So having said that, in closing, I'd like to say Sage X3 provides some pretty compelling tools to address all three of the important elements of traceability, compliance, quality control in an environment where products are being produced for human consumption in a very elegant manner, and allows the ability after the fact to interrogate that data to produce actionable intelligence for the benefit of the organization. So in conclusion, I'd like to say basically the organizations, before we rush off over there, we had done some research and brought up some names of the organizations that recently had recall events. And if you're interested, if you send us an email, we can send you the links for publicly available information related to many of these recalls. And Menu Foods was the other company that actually ended up having to shut down after being 30 years in business from a very compelling event. So this is a constant reminder that even major brands have to be very, very careful. And if you extrapolate that, everybody in the food business needs to be very careful, not just from an ethical standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, although in our minds, the ethical is as important as the legal aspect. Now, from a return on investment standpoint, Forrester is an organization that does research as their core competency. And they have, their research shows a 3-year return on investment, 177%, or just approximately under $1 million in real dollars from implementing a tool like Sage X3 for a mid-market organization. So there is a very compelling return on investment directly related to enhancement of shareholder value from implementing tools like Sage X3. And we would love to connect with each or any one of you that's interested in exploring this further. We also have a very compelling offer, and I'll turn it back over to Matt Starnes to talk about that.
Thank you so much, Kerry. Great job. Yeah, so what we have for you is basically all this information, and it's expanded for the Trinity of Food Manufacturing. So it's a complete ebook, and what we'll be doing is sending out to everybody who attended. We'll be sending a link to that ebook. And I do have a question here. Oh, okay, ready? Yes, I was about to get to that. The ebook is free. It is complimentary. So we'll be sending that out. There's no cost to you. It's just our thank you for your time today and for joining us for the webinar.
And
And
I think, as Matt already said, we'll also be recording this webinar, and we'll offer the recording for playback. So if anybody's interested, please also reach out to Matt Walter. His email's on the slide, and we'll be happy to share the webinar recording with you as well.
all right. Okay, Kerry, looks like we have one more question. What is the typical implementation time for Sage X3? And that's probably a tough one. It depends on the circumstances, I would imagine.
Yes. So, typical implementation time for an organization that already has ongoing operations and has another system in place. My favorite analogy is changing an ERP system, running organizations, kind of like doing heart transplant on somebody who's jogging on a treadmill. So the key is the business has to run, and we have to rip its heart out, put a new one in. So typically we find for a mid-market company, it's anywhere from 6 months to 9 months. We've done it in 3 months with special circumstances, and we've done it in over a year, again, with special circumstances. So it's very, very hard to generalize, but we would be very happy to connect with you, look at your very specific situation, and also understand what resources your own organization is able to bring to bear upon an implementation, and then jointly we can find out what is the timeline that makes sense, keeping in mind the human factor of empowering your human capital. Typically, the learning curve is what determines timelines. Hopefully that helps.
Excellent, excellent. I'm just scanning to see. Okay, it looks like that's all for the questions. So yeah, that's all the questions we have today.
Very good. Just expanding upon the implementation question, we have a very well-defined implementation methodology and a plan, which we come armed with, and our goal is to kind of customize it to every organization, as we find every organization's DNA, its culture is different, and their internal resource abilities are very different. So it's incumbent upon us to set you up for success by assessing where all of those are and then tailoring the implementation plan accordingly. With that, I'm done. Looks like we've finished a little earlier. We'll return the extra time back to People's Day.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you very much.